Hey, Danny, how are you? I loved that piece you wrote about that. And actually, I didn't see it from your webpage. Somebody else shared it, which I loved. Hey, folks, Maui. Oh, man, it is so cold here in Maine. You should turn off your laptop and go sit in the sun for me. Virginia, Nebraska. Oh, one of my favorite states. Baton Rouge. Hey, Nancy. Olympia, Washington, St. Louis, Missouri, North Carolina, our friends in North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Lebanon, New Hampshire. I'm trying to see if we have more questions today. So let me start today with something that may or may not be useful to you. As I've been writing over the last several weeks, people respond to what I've written by talking about how frightening they find it or how depressed they feel they are after they read what I write. And I want to explain to you what I'm doing. I don't like not knowing things. For me, not knowing what's happening is really frightening. And so I write what I write at night to understand what's happening, to make sure that in my mind I get it. And I don't really, once I get it, I feel good. So I'm not really aware of how other people might read that. So just so you know, I'm not trying to frighten anybody, and there's no reason you can't let stuff wait until the next day. You don't have to read the stuff I write before bed, but it's definitely got an edge these days. And if you can think about it like I do, like, okay, now I understand, maybe that will help. Or simply wait, because there's no point in being unable to sleep because of something I've written. And I hate the idea that I'm keeping people up at night. So that's what I'm doing, and that's what I'm trying to do. All right, so let me get right into to a number of things. And I'm going to start where I've started before, and that is that there is an awful lot of vagueness and opaqueness about what's happening at our national government. And that makes it very hard, I think, both to understand what's happening and also to, as I say, feel good about what's happening. That is, and I don't mean necessarily approving of what's happening, but understanding what's happening. And that is really the big news of today. And that is that last night, a member of the Trump administration made a declaration in front of a court, a sworn declaration that said that Elon Musk is not employed by or at the head of the Department of Government Efficiency. That in fact, he is simply a senior advisor to the president and has no authority for hirings or firings or anything. And this, of course, was a surprise. It was also counter to everything that we have heard since December, when Trump said to the public that he was putting Musk in charge of the Department of Government Efficiency. But that department itself is incredibly vague. Nobody knows what it is. Nobody knows if it's actually an agency, which needs to be transparent and it has to follow a bunch of rules, or if it's something else. And whether or not you can do what Trump tried to do, which was to gut another agency and insert the Department of Government Efficiency inside of it. Nobody quite knows what's going on there. And this is all before courts, by the way. This isn't me just saying we don't know. Courts are saying, who the heck are you? And the people who are in charge of the Department of Justice are saying, we don't really know. So the fact that the Trump administration has now said, no, Musk has nothing to do with the Department of Government Efficiency, is what's going on there. So one of the things that's going on is there are 14 states that have sued to stop the Department of Government Efficiency from doing these mass firings that have sort of been underway, but really took off last Thursday. I think it was, maybe it was Friday, but I think it was last Thursday, and have continued over the weekend. We don't know how many people have been fired. We know it was very messily done, that theoretically the people who were fired, and I use the passive tense there, which you know I don't like to do, and I'll say more about that in a minute. We do know that theoretically they were people in a probationary period for the federal government, which usually means that it's the first year of their employment, but probationary periods also are associated with promotions or with moving from one job to another. So a lot of people got swept into it who had been with the federal government for more years than that. Veterans were swept in who theoretically should have had protection for the amount of years that they were in the service. The reason I mentioned that I don't like to use the passive voice and had to there was because when you use the passive voice, there is no actor. Which is one of the reasons it's not interesting to read passive voice. If you remember your English teacher saying, make it active, and you're thinking, what on earth is she talking about? The reason that people care about the active voice in writing is because somebody does something. So it's the difference between, the victim was murdered and Jane and John murdered the victim, right? In one case, Jane and John is doing the murdering. And that the reason I had to use passive voice in that, what I was just saying, is because it's really all extraordinarily vague. That is deeply problematic, but it speaks to a number of things. First of all, it speaks to the fact that that it's not clear who is doing what, and that is a real problem for our system of accountability. But it's also an assault on our constitutional system. And what I mean by that is this. We have the Constitution, to the United States Constitution, which provides the framework for our laws. And they're quite clear. And when they're not clear, they're lawsuits, and they become clear. So one of the reasons that some laws go on forever is because there's always somebody who said, well, wait, I can get around this by doing this. And they have to amend the law. They have to make it so that it's clear. And it's very clear under our system of laws who's supposed to do what, and who is responsible for doing what, and who is to blame for doing what. And in the case, for example, of the firings that took place over the weekend, it's not clear who did it. So although Musk has been boasting that his Department of Government Efficiency has made those firings, now the administration says, well, no, actually he's not. He has no authority to do that. So it's the Office of Personnel Management. Well, the Office of Personnel Management is under the executive branch, but it is now full of people who are associated with Musk. So there's this vagueness and an inability for people to say, hey, you're the problem, here's the law, and here's how we're going to address the fact that you are breaking the law, because in the case of these firings, the law was not fired, or apparently not fired in most, if not all, of those cases. And there's already, I think, 5 lawsuits over it, but I could be wrong about the number of lawsuits. So that whole vagueness is important, both because it is erasing our normal channels of accountability. It makes it very hard to grasp onto somebody legally when they're sliding around and you can't tell who's in charge of them. It is also designed to erase the laws that check the power of the executive branch or the power of the president, because it's very hard to tell who's doing what. And in that case, the administration is simply taking the power and saying, we're going to do this. And by the time the courts catch up, it's going to be too late. So for USAID, for example, which looks as if it is going to be found to be unconstitutional, is it going to matter that it's unconstitutional when there's no U.S. aid officers left? I mean, there's ways that you can use this vagueness and this time and this slipperiness to slow things down. And that, I think, is at least part of what's going on. All right, but there's another thing that is bothering me right now. So that's the big thing, is that now the administration is fudging about who's doing what. And by the way, and I will try to remember to come back to this, part of that is because there's been such pushback against it. I mean, part of the reason they're saying, oh, no, we were kidding or whatever, Elon Musk is not in charge, even though we said he was and he said he was, is because there is such furor over that. And that pressure is going to be really important to keep up. Okay, so there's something else here. There's one more thing here. A number of people have written to me with a piece that is going viral on Facebook that says that there's nothing that the Department of Government Efficiency is doing that Bill Clinton and Al Gore didn't do in the 1990s. Now, a couple of things about this. First of all, When you see these whataboutisms, that is classic disinformation. That is classic disinformation. So all of a sudden they're talking about Clinton and Al Gore, who were in the White House 30 years ago, and this is somehow a precedent for what the Department of Government Efficiency and the Trump administration are doing is the argument. But just to be clear, in fact, there was significant reform of the government under Clinton and Gore, but Congress passed a law, and they followed the law. They Clinton signed the law and they followed the law, and that's how that downsizing happened. I mean, Al Gore didn't, or they certainly didn't bring in somebody from outside to do it without saying who was going to do what. And at the time, that was actually popular. You're not going to hear a lot of, you can Google it, by the way, there's a lot of really good articles about it. You're not going to hear a lot of people saying, oh, I knew it was terrible at the time. People were let go of jobs because they were able to retire, or there were actual procedures for figuring out who should be let go. They weren't these massive offloads of people the way you're seeing now with, they're getting their names wrong. They're saying all of them didn't perform, even though they've had good performance reviews. I mean, it's a very different thing now. But just so you know, when you see something viral like this now going around, I must have had, I don't know how many dozens of people send that to me. That's disinformation. That's somebody recognizing that that's really unpopular, and they're spreading out this idea all over the place that in fact there's nothing unusual about what's happening now, and somehow it's the Democrats who started this. At this point in your lives, anytime you see whataboutism that blames the Democrats, you should assume it's disinformation. And think about the way you live your own life. If somebody lies to you again and again and again and again, you might still love them. I can think of somebody like this in my life. But I don't believe anything they say without assuming it's been exaggerated or is a lie or something. And then you can check, and maybe sometimes that person will be right. But you have to start from the premise of that this is disinformation. And you should be doing that with all the stuff that comes across your desk. And the things that people are saying to me, what do I say about this? Can you answer this? And the answer is that is a technique of disinformation to tangle you in this downward spiral of, well, yeah, but look at this. Yeah, but. And as Stephen King says in his wonderful book on writing, anytime you say, yeah, but, you're losing. That's not a good conversation to have, because it's designed to, he's talking about it in a different context, but it's designed to waste your time and to get you into a rabbit hole that you can't get out of. So stop looking at this stuff and saying, wait a minute, what I see around me isn't right. Look, this happened before, because you're going to see a lot of it going forward. And I'm going to talk more about that now. All right. There's something that is worrying me that I'm not seeing enough. Somebody called my attention to it this weekend, and I think it's really important for people to understand. And that's that the Department of Government Efficiency and Elon Musk are doing all kinds of things that are deeply disturbing. The cuts to the federal government in the many ways in which we care deeply about them. The fact that they have gotten permission to get into the United States Treasury's payment systems, and into the files from the United States Agency for International Development. And now over the weekend, they appear to have gotten permission to go into the files from the Internal Revenue Service. Now, remember how desperately Trump has protected any access to his own tax returns. And there are laws that protect those things. So they appear to have gotten permission to go into the IRS files and also into the Social Security Administration's files. All right, so think about what you have put on your taxes, especially those of you with children. You put on your taxes all your information, all your children's information, and deductions, which say a lot about what money you give, where your children might have special needs, any elderly people. And think also about what the Social Security Administration has for you. It has your Social Security number. It has all the jobs you've had for which you have had Social Security withheld. It has your address, and sometimes it has your medical records and other things that it might have. All right, so this is huge. All right, first of all, that is huge. It is an enormous breach of our privacy. And there are many reasons for you as an individual to be concerned about that. You might be concerned about Social Security payments. You might be concerned about any number of things that are in that material that now the Department of Government Efficiency, the people involved in it, have had access. As bad as that is, that's not what worries me. And here's a concept that I really hope people get and understand here, with the caveat that this is just what I'm thinking about, and I could be absolutely wrong, but I think it's worth having on your radar screen. So we're in the middle, aside from politics or anything else, we humans are in the middle of a revolution, and that's the revolution that is enabled by the internet, by computing technologies and the internet. And those are both extraordinarily exciting because they can teach us things that we had no concept of being able to do otherwise. They can sequence genes, they can do all sorts of things. But they also have enormously frightening implications as well. Now, one of the ways that artificial intelligence becomes learns is by having data, by having lots and lots of data. Now, aside from perhaps China, which is using its AI in ways that can be very frightening, aside from China, is there any organization in the world that has more data about humans than the United States government? Maybe. But this is an enormous pool of data. And an enormous pool of data that now a lot of appears to be in the hands of Elon Musk, who is, of course, trying to develop his own artificial intelligence companies to rival those of Sam Altman, for example, with OpenAI, and with some of the other people who are trying to develop AI. Sorry, my foot is caught on something that's making me crazy. All right. So even today, he came up with Grok 3. That was the new version of his old AI, and now he's got all this data, and what can you do with that data? So now I'm going to make a little bit of a leap here to put something together, and this is the piece that I think you need to understand, and that's advertising. I know that seems like a real leap, but it's a really important concept, because when you think about yourself as a consumer, you probably think that you're valuable to a company because you're going to buy a refrigerator, or you're going to buy a new pair of shoes, or, they need to know you're going to buy some kind of a service. But that's actually not why you're valuable. And there's a really interesting history to this. You're valuable because if a company knows a lot about you, it can aggregate you with other people, and it can then say to the person who produces the shoes or the refrigerator, hey, I can guarantee you that these people are going to buy your product if only you advertise in this certain way. And this came actually from a really interesting study that was done in the 1930s by a man named Frank Stanton, who at the time was a doctoral candidate, and he wanted to understand how people used new technologies. So what he did was he put onto radios what he told people was a way to measure how much electricity the radios used. But in fact, that wasn't what it did. Instead of just measuring electricity, what the things he put on the boxes did is they measured the way that families use the radio. What programs they listen to, how often they listen to those programs. And then after, I think it was a month, he came back and he asked those people to self-report how they had used the radio in that time. And what he discovered was they self-reported things that were very different than what they actually had done. So they talked about listening to educational programs when in fact they were listening to, much more less educational, sort of more popular stuff. And he recognized that if you could figure out what people were really doing, you could take that data and you could go to an advertiser and you could say, hey, listen, the people who listen to this radio show can be bundled in such a way that you can sell this product to them. And that's the level he was at in the 1930s, late 1930s. He went on to become the president of CBS. His name is Frank Stanton. And that idea of packaging people in data spaces is now central to the use of social media. So if you think about the rise of Cambridge Analytica in 2015, 2016, before the election of 2016, the point of Cambridge Analytica was, do you remember all those games that there were on Facebook that said things like, which beetle are you and which dog are you? And what they did is they got a whole bunch of people to show them what they cared about. And they were able in that election to target advertising at people to urge them to vote for Donald Trump. Now, there's a big fight about how effective that was, and there's a fight among IT people through political scientists about how effective that was. But the idea that if you know a lot about people, you can sell them things in a certain way is very much at the heart of the use of social media. Now, we don't really have a lot of very good privacy laws around social media, but we do have very good privacy laws around our personal data that the IRS has or Social Security has, right? Except now that data at least appears to have been put into the hands of somebody who's trying to build this large AI machine, all right? So think about it. If you can aggregate our data and say, for example, these people appear to be fomenting trouble against the administration, or these people appear to be people that you could get to bow out of politics altogether, or these people could be urged to violence, you suddenly have the kinds of surveillance state and political state that national security people have been very concerned about with authoritarian states. And that is extremely concerning when the person whose hands into whose hands this data is falling is somebody who has in so many countries been encouraging right-wing authoritarianism. But there is a link there, I think, to the Trump administration's new friendliness with Russia. Because, of course, this is what Russia did to help Trump in 2016 and has continued to do to unbalance politics in democracies. So when I look at where we are, I am very concerned about the pieces of it, but I think we better be paying attention to the larger piece. Or the larger picture, and I hope I'm wrong. I mean, this it just sounds too crazy in too many ways. But if there's even a chance that this could happen, I think we need to be aware of it. And I can't imagine why otherwise Musk is making such a play for everybody's data. And, he says it's about fraud and waste and corruption. They haven't produced any fraud and waste and corruption at all. They keep saying, oh, there's all this stuff, and the right wing is reproducing it. Oh, we found all these people who are collecting Social Security checks, and they're 150 years old. And anybody who follows IT at all knows that that's part of the program on which Social Security was written, that if there is a default number, it goes to 1875. In that particular case. So, that's just crap. I mean, he hasn't produced anything, and courts have said, you have not produced anything. You keep saying this, but you haven't produced anything. And once again, the federal government has had, anyway, its own inspectors, both inspectors general, until Trump fired 18 of them the other day, who are independent investigators of the departments, and also the General Accountability Office, which the GAO, which investigates constantly. That's its job. It's nonpartisan. It goes ahead and investigates, and in fact had turned up significant amounts of fraud from the administration of the COVID bills when Trump was president, and they now have all been fired. And there, of course, is also the fact that the FBI also investigates fraud, particularly healthcare fraud. So this idea that somehow, somebody wrote to me last night and said, how was there all this fraud there and no one caught it? And the answer is, first of all, the government catches fraud all the time. But second of all, Musk has not produced anything. He keeps saying he's going to. I remember there keep being these deadlines, and last week he put up the Department of Government Efficiency website, and it was, first of all, blank, and then when they built it out over, I guess it was across Wednesday and Thursday, it was so badly built out that a whole bunch of people hacked it and said things like, these experts don't know what they're doing. And then he said, well, we'll have it by the end of the weekend, and this is now Tuesday, and I haven't looked today, but there hasn't been anything. So that reach for our data, both, I think, to force us onto his platforms, to use his platforms for our financial exchanges, for example, and to be able to adjust society is something I think that that we better have in mind. Okay, a couple other things. The SAVE Act. There's a bunch of things that people have asked about. The SAVE Act, once again, I think I articulated this here, is a problem in search of a solution in search of a problem. It is designed theoretically to guarantee that non-citizens don't vote, but it's already against the law for non-citizens to vote, and and it's incredibly rare for that to happen. But what the SAVE Act does do is it really cuts back on who can vote, especially women who have changed their names when they got married, because it says that you have to have a birth certificate with your current name on it or a passport. Right now, the law is very vaguely written. It's a little hard to know if it would be okay to bring in a marriage license or whatever. But the SAVE Act, I think, is emblematic of something bigger and worth knowing about, because what the SAVE Act sets out to do is to stop, as I say, voter fraud, which is incredibly rare. But what it does is it perpetrates something that is not rare in the United States, and that's election fraud. That's when you take an election and you alter the conditions of it in such a way that the people who are going to vote against you can't vote, through voter suppression, through things like having a change in documentation so that women can't vote because they changed their names. That's something that I think is indicative of what this administration is hoping to do, and that's to make sure that in the future it'll be harder and harder to knock Republicans out of office. And that's what people who study authoritarianism, people like, for example, I'm not going to say this actually because I've read this, but I'm not sure which one of them it was. People who study authoritarianism have said they think that's the direction the United States is going, where we do have elections, but it's almost impossible for the opponents of the ruling party to win them. And that's the SAVE Act is coming up, I think it's on the 23rd of this month. They're going to be discussing it in Congress, and that's something to speak up about as well. So another thing that is worth pointing out here is there are a number of special elections coming up. An election for the Supreme Court in Wisconsin. I shouldn't even say what I think the dates are. You should look it up because, again, off the top, I've been doing something else all day. So off the top of my head, I'm afraid I'll get it wrong. But if you have any, if you're looking to put some energy, that's a really important election because it is that Supreme Court that will decide whether, plus there'll be one more election before before 2030. But in that particular election, if the Republicans win this special election, the Democrats can't win back control of the Supreme Court in Wisconsin, and therefore the Republicans will once again have control of gerrymandering in the state of Wisconsin. When they did the similar thing in Michigan, and the Democrats finally won it back and got the fair maps that the voters had requested, even though those fair maps did favor Republicans because of the way things fall, the population falls in Minnesota. In Michigan, the Democrats won all three branches of, both houses and the governorship. And the same is almost certain to happen in states like Wisconsin, North Carolina, the places where they have been gerrymandered within an inch of your life, because they don't gerrymander states that they were going to win anyway. You look at Massachusetts, which always votes Democratic. It's not gerrymandered. There's no need to gerrymander it. The Democrats know they're going to win. So if you see a gerrymandered state, you see a state that the whatever party has gerrymandered it thinks it cannot win in free and fair elections. And those are overwhelmingly Republican states at this point. All right, so there is the special election in Wisconsin, but there are also two special elections coming up in Florida. They're in deep red districts, but they would go a long way to being able to neuter what the Republicans have been doing in the House of Representatives. So, okay, so here's a number of questions that people have asked about. We've got an awful lot going on in Congress right now. And you got to remember that the Republicans hold control of the House and the Senate and the White House. Not by much. If you take those in reverse order, Trump did win the White House, but more people voted for somebody other than him than voted for him. If you look at the Senate, the Republicans have 3 seats, a 3-seat majority. And if you look at the House of Representatives, I think it's either 2 or 3 seats. I could be wrong. It might be a few more than that, but these are razor thin majorities. And here's the problem for the Republican Party. The problem is that they are bitterly divided. So in the House of Representatives, which is where bills for revenue must begin, the House Freedom Caucus, the far right caucus, and the real person who speaks a lot about that is Chip Roy from Texas. They are furious at the growth of the national debt, and they want to slash the government down to nothing, both out of principle, because they think they don't want a government, but also because of the expense of it. And they don't want any increases, for example, in the debt limit, because they don't want to add to the national debt. And the debt limit, if you remember, is this weird thing that we have. I believe the only other country that's got something like this is Denmark, but it's not a political football over there. All the debt limit it comes from World War I. And until World War I, anytime the government needed to raise money, Congress told the Treasury what to do. And by that, I mean, quite literally, they would say, well, we need to raise $6 million, or let's say $16 million. And the best way to do that is for us to sell bonds. But let's decide if the bond should last for 5 years at 3%, or at 7 years at 2%, and those conversations could go on for a very long time. Believe me, I read them all for the Civil War. But by the time we got to World War I, the government was spending so much money to fight that war, Congress couldn't have done anything other than raise money. So what they said to the Treasury is, go ahead, we'll set a limit to which you have to adhere. And then we don't care how you raise that money. Sell bonds, we don't care. Just raise it up to here. And then if you need more money, come back to us, and we'll decide if we should stop raising money or if we should just raise the debt ceiling. It was never an issue until very recently. And the reason for that is because always in American history, always, 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 from 1861, beginning of the Civil War, through 1981, the beginning of the Reagan era, whenever there was a mismatch between how much money the government was spending and how much money the government was taking in, unless it was wartime, in which there was an understanding that the government would spend a lot more than it took in simply because of the demands of a war. The way that Congress handled it was they did try to cut back on certain things, but they also just raised taxes. They raised taxes on those people who had more money than everybody else. And this began actually right in 1861. We get our first progressive tax, our first income tax. It was the Republicans who invented that. But so once you get Reagan in there, and then George H.W. Bush raises taxes. Remember, he gets elected saying, "Read my lips, no more taxes, no new taxes." And then he has to back off on that because Reagan has created such a deficit during his term. And that's one of the reasons that the Republican Party turns against him and ends up destroying his bid for re-election. But what happens is that with those taxes in the omnibus bill that George H.W. Bush was willing to sign, and then with some things that Clinton did, the government actually ran a surplus in the 1990s, all right? Ran a surplus. More money came in than went out. The government ran a surplus in the 1990s, all right? So what happens is when George W. Bush gets elected in 2000, even before Congress comes back into session, he goes for a huge tax cut with the argument in part that if you have money coming in, people are going to use it for things like roads and schools and hospitals, and they want to get rid of that government, and they also want to get rid of the regulation that goes along with it. So George W. Bush has these huge tax cuts, and then he has two unfunded wars, Iraq and Afghanistan. And the argument is, from Reagan forward, that cutting taxes will spur economic growth. And the argument is that if you have a government that regulates business and that collects taxes, especially from people with a lot of money, what that means is that it hampers innovation and it hampers an individual's ability to spend their money in ways that are enormously productive. So the argument is that a bunch of government bureaucrats won't be able to spend that money in a way that efficiently uses the markets. So essentially you want to get the government out of things and let individuals ride the market because that'll be far more efficient. And as they build the government, as they build this economy, it's going to bring in more tax dollars and everybody's going to be able to have everything they want so long as you cut taxes. Well, the problem with that was it has never worked. It has never worked. That was the idea. In fact, in 1981, when David Stockman, who was Reagan's director of the Office of Management and Budget, put the tax cuts that they were planning into the government computers, the government computers just said, you're going to blow out the deficit and you're not going to see the kind of money you're talking about. And so they just reprogrammed the computers. In fact, we had between 1981 and 2021 is that about $50 trillion moved from the bottom 90% to the top 1%. And everybody keeps asking me where I get that statistic, so here's where you find it. Google it. An article from Time magazine comes up. Just Google $50 trillion 1981 2021, and this article from Time will come up and it links to the study that established this, but it's actually not challenged. Robert Reich talks about it. Thomas Piketty talks about it. If you look at income inequality, it's a pretty widely accepted statistic. Anyway, so that's the argument behind the tax cuts, the increasing tax cuts. And you saw the same thing with Trump's first term with the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, with the argument that if you cut taxes for the wealthy and corporations, it would create jobs because there would be all this extra money in the economy and it would be invested and it would create new businesses and more people would have jobs and everything would be great. In fact, as you probably know, Trump added a quarter of our national debt before COVID to our debt. And the new extension of those tax cuts, they're supposed to expire in 2025. The extension of that is projected by the nonpartisan congressional office that does that, to add, I think it's 4.6 trillion to our debt. So to go back to where I was, the problem for the Republicans is that the far right Republicans don't want to add to that debt. But the more mainstream Republicans want those tax cuts. And right now, it does not look like they're going to be able to figure that out. Now, here's the problem. The problem is that the funding for our government until, I think it's March 14th, but again, I don't have the numbers in front of me. The funding of our government runs out on that date, and we need to have something in place or the government will have to shut down. And not entirely, but they shut down the national parks and they shut down a whole bunch of different things. So they need to have that in place. But House Speaker Mike Johnson wants to do a short-term continuing resolution. And there's two problems with that. One is if Musk has really found all this waste and fraud in the current budget, why would you continue it? You know, that doesn't make any sense at all. And the Senate Republicans came out last week, and I haven't written about this yet, but I thought it was fascinating. The Senate Republicans wrote a letter to Trump saying, listen, you need to extend these tax cuts permanently. We're holding on for that. We don't want any short-term crap. We want a permanent extension of those tax cuts. Now, why are they doing it? They're probably doing it for a number of reasons, not least of which, I hate to do this to you, but because Musk has threatened to primary anybody who doesn't do what he and Trump want, if in fact the senators deliver these long-term tax cuts for the very wealthy and for corporations, they might very well have their own base of financing that will enable them to move away from worrying about Trump and Musk. All right, so this is why the Republicans are in real trouble, but I'm not done yet. The other problem, of course, is that on January 21st of this year, the Treasury hit the need to use extraordinary measures so that we would not hit that debt ceiling. So if we hit the debt ceiling and we can't pay our bills, the financial system across the country and probably across the world is going to collapse. So that debt ceiling has to be raised. Or we have to completely destroy the government so we don't actually spend any money. But the Freedom Caucus people don't want the debt ceiling to be raised. The rest of the Republicans want to pass laws that are going to increase the debt by more than $4 trillion over 10 years. I should have said that, over 10 years. And they don't have large margins in Congress. So where does this leave us? This leaves us with a lot of Republicans trying to say the Democrats are going to shut down the government because they're trying to force the Democrats to come on board to join them because they know they can't get the Republicans to vote. This is literally who Republican voters voted for, Chip Roy and the people who are with that far-right Freedom Caucus. Mazie from Kentucky is another one. And they need those Democratic votes. The Democrats are now saying, this is not our problem. You are in control of the House and the Senate and the White House. If you're going to mess around with our finances the way you're talking about doing, it is on your head, not on our head. So when you start to hear these claims that the Democrats are shutting down the government, that's, again, because the Republicans can't get their acts together. And that's what's going on that front. And really needs to be continually hammered on, because the one other thing that was here, because there's a larger game here afoot, of course, and that's the Democrats are saying, listen, we're happy to help with the government, but not when you're destroying the government. So you need to back off of all the crap that Musk and Trump and crew are doing before we're going to vote for anything. And that's the sort of the larger picture here. And I know it's really in the weeds, but again, just to get us out of the weeds here, what we're really talking about is the American government and how the American government works. And what we have right now, people have said to me, are we in danger of a coup? And I maintain we are in a constitutional coup. We're in a constitutional crisis in which people are trying to take over our government and disregard our laws. And again, what I mean by that is that the Constitution sets out very clearly that it's Congress that passes the laws. Congress passes the laws. The president signs them or vetoes them, but once they're in place, the president takes an oath to faithfully execute the laws. And to the degree that this administration is firing people and defunding things like U.S. aid, which is blatantly unconstitutional, because of the idea that the Congress funds these laws and the Congress writes these laws and the executive must execute them. The fact that they're firing people against the law and so on they say they are trying to challenge the idea that Congress alone can have control over the laws. They want to center that power in the executive branch. And their hope, according to the documents that have been released, is to throw the case in front of the Supreme Court with the idea that the Supreme Court will say, yeah, the president can go ahead and do this because he is the head of the executive branch. But before you think, oh, they're going to do that automatically, remember that what the Supreme Court said in Trump versus U.S. in July of 2024 was that Trump or the president can't be criminally charged for actions taken within his Article 2 powers. And that the court has to decide what those are. And Article 2 is a reference to the part of the Constitution that lays out the power of the president. That says nothing about Article 1 powers. And Article 1 powers are the powers of Congress, which are very clear in the Constitution that it's Congress and Congress alone that makes the laws. So it's not entirely clear that the Supreme Court would in fact side with Trump in this, not least because if he doesn't need Congress, he sure doesn't need the courts. And I think that John Roberts, in any case, is going to be eager to make sure he doesn't write himself out of a job. So we're in this extraordinary mess right now. But let me now give you some good news. And that is that Musk and the administration would not be backing away from the Department of Government Efficiency if everything was going swimmingly. Things have really been disastrous so far for this administration. And I don't just mean the rollouts of things like U.S. aid, where we're hearing horror stories, for example, recently of a U.S. aid worker in a country that didn't have good medical care, who was, of course, promised that his family would be medevaced out if there were any issues, and his wife is in a high-risk pregnancy, and the Trump administration just left her in the care of the medical situation in the country where she is. And that's horrific. This is somebody that we promised as people that we would take care of if they worked for us, and instead his family is at risk now because of the actions of the Trump administration. So that has been, not gone terribly well. The recognition that they fired the people who guard our nuclear stockpiles and had to find them and hire them back. There's any number of ways in which this rollout has not gone well. One of the guys who went into the Treasury payment system had to be let go because it turned out he was making really outrageous statements of racism and flirting with Nazism. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that hasn't gone terribly well, but even more visibly than that, the way that the administration has turned its back on Europe, our NATO allies, and turned toward Russia and Hungary is causing a lot of backlash even among the Republican Party. And Pete Hegseth's performance in Brussels, which came right before the Munich conference last weekend, he was at Brussels at the meeting of the defense ministers to protect Ukraine. he just looked like a fool. I mean, he was largely inarticulate. He had to walk back what he had said, and he referred to it again in the passive voice, a statement that was made, and he was the one who made the statement. And then the chair of the Senate Armed Services Committee, Roger Wicker, a Republican of Mississippi, called his performance in Brussels a rookie mistake. The administration it's really basically stepping on one rake after another. The other thing that is happening in the midst of all this is, of course, the legal pushback, and the people who are fighting against the Trump administration have so far won everything across the board. But more than that, I think, and I hope, Americans are themselves pushing back. They are turning out for organized demonstrations against the firing of the people who work for us, against the power of Elon Musk, for whom nobody voted, against the power of the Department of Government Efficiency, and we're swamping the switchboards at Congress, both the Senate and the House of Representatives, and showing up at state houses and really putting pressure on people. And you got to remember, it takes about 3.5% of a country to change the public conversation. And as we are seeing, the cuts that the Trump administration is making are justified with the idea that they're going after diversity, equity, and inclusion. And, Musk tweeted a picture of himself dressed as a Roman gladiator who was making war on woke over the weekend. But the reality is, as people like me have always said, political scientists and historians, it's the Republican-dominated states that get the most money and support from the federal government. So right now, farmers who voted for Trump by a margin of 3-1 are watching $2 billion of purchases from USAID disappear. They're watching retaliatory tariffs from Canada, for example. They're watching Canada and other countries making bilateral agreements with other countries for the grains and the agricultural products that they used to sell. This is a crisis for the family farm. And as you know, the Project 2025 calls for getting rid of family farms and the rise of agribusiness because they say it's more efficient. That's in Project 2025. So farmers are hurting really badly, and they're hurting for things like the cease in funding for the Inflation Reduction Act, which was a partnership with the federal government, where if you invested in new fencing and in technologies that enabled you to use less energy, the government would help you. And now the government is simply not paying its share, even though the farmers are already on the hook for their share. So that population is angry and not so keen on what DOGE is, or the Department of Government Efficiency, what I call DOGGY, is doing. Similarly, the cuts to the National Institutes of Health badly hurt Republican states because this brings tons of money into their states, and the cuts to the Department of Education really badly will hurt Republican-dominated states because they take far more money from the federal government through the form of grants to low-income regions than the Democratic-dominated states do. So this allegiance is unstable, and in addition, the threatened cuts to Medicaid. There's talk about cuts to Medicare and Social Security, although Trump has always said he would defend those. But cuts to Medicaid, which is what the Republicans in Congress are talking about, is going to devastate Republican-dominated states and the key MAGA voters. And Steve Bannon is the one who's been pointing this out, saying, do not go after Medicaid. Those are the MAGA voters. So this whole thing that seems so frightening, and that is in fact a constitutional crisis, and is devastating our country in so many ways, is still profoundly unstable. This is not a done deal. And now is the time really to speak up and to really put pressure, especially on Republicans, but also on Democrats, to protect our government and to protect our Constitution. Now, a number of people have written to me saying, wouldn't it be a good idea for somebody to do every night a roundup of what happened during the day? I can't agree with you more. I'm going to try and do more of these myself. Unfortunately, it's Maine in February, and I got snowed in my house because it's in my house. I'm across the way, and I got snowed in and couldn't do any for the last couple of days. But this is a great idea. I think people are going to be pushing it. Pete Buttigieg is now on Blue Sky, and he's always great wherever he is. I think you're going to see more and more of this coming from the Democrats, but I'm going to emphasize to you once again, a number of people keep writing to me saying, where's our hero? Where's our leader? And I just want to emphasize that we're the ones who are going to create that leader. Abraham Lincoln didn't come from the heavens. We created Abraham Lincoln. And the more pressure that we put on our political system to do what we want it to do, the better the chances are that we're going to get a leader who does what we want. The same way that the radical right produced Donald Trump, we can produce the leader that we want. And I don't know who that's going to be at all. I could maybe have some guesses, and maybe we don't know yet. But the more we speak up, not only in reaction to what the Trump people are doing, but saying, this is what I want out of my government. These are the things that I care about. Hey, listen, I care about free and fair votes. I'm really upset about the SAVE Act, and that's something I'm going to put some muscle behind. You can't do everything, but to the degree that you can articulate what it is you want your government to do, and if lucky, why, that's how you change this public conversation, because there is not support for what's happening. There is not a mandate for what Trump is doing. And you can see this, by the way, when you see articles. I saw one recently that said Frank Luntz, who is a Republican operative, says the Democrats love what Trump is doing. That's a planted story. I could make something up right now too, but to the degree you're seeing pushback about how popular all this stuff is, think about it. Think about it in your own life. Do you see people saying this is great? I mean, you see some people, of course, but this is not like, some great moment where people are saying, my God, I love this. Some people are behind it, but I'm seeing an awful lot of people who either were quiet before or even voted Republicans saying, wait a minute, I didn't vote for you to cut Medicaid. That's what my mother lives on. And that instability means that we're in a period in which, as I say, there's a lot of power going around, and we can direct that power if we continue to step up, if we continue to push back everywhere we can on anything that's a lie. If we continue to insist on the kind of country that we want, I suspect what we're going to find, if we are successful, is that a lot of people who voted for Donald Trump were hoping to get rich people out of the way of ordinary people. That in fact, they really think this system is gamed for the rich. And here's a news flash. It is. In that, we share common ground with an awful lot of people in this country who don't want handouts. They want a fair playing field. And that's not just people of color. It's not just women. It's poor men. It's poor, it's people who are on the make. It's immigrants. It's people who say, listen, I love America because it lets me be anything I want to be. But when everything is sewn up for, the 813 people, I saw the statistic yesterday in America, who have more money than the bottom 60%, you got a problem. And this is the moment to articulate that and to demand solutions to it, because if we don't demand solutions within our democratic system, the solutions will come from authoritarianism, and that's really close. It hasn't won yet, but the fact we have turned away from our European allies is having them start to warn against us. As someone said, we are now the bad guys. It's not written in stone yet, but we must speak up about it now before it becomes written in stone, while those people trying to establish that are really insecure. Because once they're in power, if I'm right about what Musk is doing, it's going to be irretrievable. I still think we can do it. All right, I was all over the map today, but thank you for being here. And like I say, I'll try and do these more frequently. If you could stop the ice from coming out of the sky for a while here in Maine, I'd be able to do them more often. Anyway, thank you for being here, and I will talk to you soon. Take care. What on earth is going on in Texas? It's kind of a complicated story, but it's also a really big story. So I'm going to walk you through it. Let me start here with what's been happening in Texas. So if you remember, Donald Trump is very concerned about the 2026 elections and, of course, 2028, but especially 2026, because if you think about the way the House of Representatives is currently set up, the Republicans are in control of it, but only by a razor thin majority. And a lot of that is because of previous gerrymandering that gave the Republicans an advantage over the Democrats. So going into the 2026 election, even with those advantages, Trump and other Republicans are very concerned that they're going to lose control over the House of Representatives because Trump's approval ratings are in the dirt. Let's put it that way. Let me see. I looked at them last night. I think he's got 61% of Americans think he's done a bad job in office, and 38%, I think, off the top of my head, maybe 39%, maybe 37%, somewhere in there, approve of what he's doing. That's not a good thing for a president who almost always takes hits in a midterm election anyway, for a number of reasons. So Trump is trying to find extra seats anywhere he possibly can. And the first place to which he turned was to Texas, because Texas has a supermajority in or very strong majority of Republicans in the legislature. And it has a very staunch Republican governor who sort of is Trump light, if you will. And, he's at the state level. And so Trump went to the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, a Republican, and asked him to call a special session of the Texas legislature to redistrict the state in order to find 5 more seats. That is, cut up the state in such a way that 5 Democrats would lose their seats and Republicans would pick those seats up this year, before the 2026 election. Now, that is not unprecedented. Texas did it before in an attempt to grab power, but it's really almost never done because the states redistrict after every census, and the censuses are taken on the zero numbered years. So every decade, we had one in 2020, we'll have one in 2030, we'll have one in 2040, and so on. So the redistricting takes place in the year after that, or the 2 years after that, depending on how quickly the state legislature gets going. And that's why the 2010 elections were such a huge deal, because the Republicans launched something called Operation Red Map that enabled them to take over control of state houses. Lots of people don't pay attention to state house races, pay attention, to take over the state houses and then to gerrymander those maps. That is, either pack their opponents into really limited districts so the voting power of their opponents was diluted, or crack those populations. It's called cracking and packing, or packing and cracking, that diluted them so that they couldn't win actual seats in states like North Carolina, Ohio, Kansas, Michigan, Wisconsin. There were a whole bunch of them in 2010. Now, some of those states have been recovered for fair maps and fair districting, as Michigan has been, and that's a process that's ongoing. So anyway, Trump asked Abbott to call the legislature into special session to redo the maps in this 5th year into that process. Again, very, very unusual. But the Democrats, who recognize this as an extraordinary power grab, and this is in the House in Texas, the Democrats in the House recognize that this was just a naked power grab. Texas is already gerrymandered, by the way. And 51 of them left Texas for Illinois especially, but also for New York and Massachusetts. And they did that to deprive the Republicans of what's called a quorum. And a quorum is the minimum number of people you need to have present in order to conduct business. That is, a legislature, two people in the legislature can't get together and say, hey, we're the legislature, we're going to pass laws. There are laws about the minimum number of people you have to have in order to conduct business. So by leaving the state, those Democrats made it so that the Republicans couldn't pass these gerrymandered maps. They stayed out of the state until the first session, special session, expired. It was for a limited amount of time. Abbott called one instantly again, and they can't stay out of the state forever. The legislature is very much a part-time job. They all have lives. So they came back yesterday. They flew back in yesterday. And once they're back, they will provide the quorum that the Republicans need to smash through these maps, and they will get the extra 5 seats if those things pass, which it certainly looks like they will. But what they didn't foresee is that when they got home, the Republican Speaker of the House, a man named Dustin Burrows, insisted that they sign what they're calling derogatorily a permission slip. They signed a piece of paper that committed them to showing up for the votes to enable the Republicans to push through these maps. And part of that was that they would have state troopers surrounding them, that they would have guards on them as they went about their daily business to guarantee that they would show up to vote in the House of Representatives for these. They don't have to vote for the maps, but they have to be present so the Republicans can force the maps through. They also had to agree to this until the final vote on the measure, which I think is going to be in about 3 weeks. I can't remember that off the top of my head. So a number of them did that, but one woman who represents a majority-minority district in Fort Worth, a woman named Nicole Collier, refused. She said, I think I have a quote from her here. She said, "I refuse to sign. I will not agree to be in custody. I'm not a criminal. I'm exercising my right to resist and oppose the decisions of our government. So this is my form of protest." She went on to say, "My constituents sent me to Austin to protect their voices and rights. I refuse to sign away my dignity as a duly elected representative just so Republicans can control my movements and monitor me with police escorts." She also pointed out that anybody who was escorting these 51 Democratic lawmakers wasn't actually on the beat doing their jobs. And she said, I hope you all feel safe with the Republicans doing that with your police officers. But when that happened, the Republican leadership forbade her from leaving the Capitol. So she was stuck in the Capitol under punishment, under threat of arrest, that if she stepped out of the Capitol, they would arrest her. Whether or not they locked the doors is not yet clear to me. So she spent the night in the Capitol, in the chamber last night. And when protesters showed up to chant, "Let her go," just troopers arrested them. Lots of protests there. But this morning, I think it was, or maybe this afternoon, morning her time, she filed a writ of habeas corpus saying that they're imprisoning me without, unjustly, and I want to be released from the Capitol building. So that's the specifics of what happened. But the larger picture of what happened is that the Republican leadership, it's really important to remember in this case that this is not just about Texas, and it's not just about the Texas legislature. Having the Democrats there is the only way that the Republicans can hammer through this 5-seat power grab. And that 5-seat power grab is, they believe, imperative to them holding the House of Representatives in 2017. 2026 after the 2027 after the 2026 elections. I'm sorry, I swim in years, and so I lose track of where we are. Just the way my brain works. Sorry about that. But so the attack on Representative Collier, and the imprisonment of her to force her to do the will of the Republicans, not only at the state level, but also at the national level, so that they can hold power, even though it is very clear that the American people have soured on this administration and quite likely will vote against it or will want to vote against it in the midterms, is an attack on all of the rights of all Americans. They are essentially imprisoning her to force her to rubber stamp a one-party state, to rubber stamp authoritarianism. It's a really big deal. Hey, Joanne, how are you?
I am good. How are you, Heather?
I'm good. We are pre-recording this, everybody, because I'm hoping to have my family eating pancakes at 10:30 on Saturday mornings. So I didn't want to run over here. And that gives us time to play a little bit with what we're going to talk about.
Indeed. And since it isn't yet the time when this will be airing, but when it does air, it will be 2 days after Thanksgiving. We are assuming a Thanksgiving-related chat would be a very good thing.
Well, and it's interesting. I actually was looking on social media the other day, and somebody was saying, why is it that Thanksgiving tends to have pretty clear menu items on it, and the rest of American holidays really don't? But for Thanksgiving, we all tend to have pretty similar, some idea of what kind of foods we'll have. And that made me think about the rituals that we associate with Thanksgiving. And that, of course, as an American historian, made me think about civic religion. And I would love to dig a little bit into that today. And that means the idea of rituals, events, flags, statues, monuments that represent a nation and the way that people react to those things.
And that along with those things bestow a sort of special sense of an usness, right? That you, I think before when we mentioned this, you sort of, I can't remember whether you used the word sort of a holiness to it, but certainly a specialness to it, that there's something that needs to be protected and guarded because it represents us in a special kind of way that isn't necessarily there every day of the year or every place where we go.
Well, and Thanksgiving certainly rises to that. I, once upon a time lived in London, and we were there over the Thanksgiving holiday, and we were a little bit amused because there was this sense that, this was some sort of American ritual that they didn't really understand, but they were willing to try and do everything they could to make it work. So it was a little bit funny because they're like, we're not going to intrude on you on Thanksgiving. It's like, really? I love Thanksgiving. It's my favorite holiday for many reasons, but it's not like a religious holiday that way at all. It's okay if you stop by. In fact, you're more than welcome to stop by. It's not like we have special prayers or anything. It's just...
But even the name of it would make people think that, right? I have to just mention for 2 seconds, I spent a semester abroad at the where was I? I was in England, in the Midlands, for a semester.
I didn't know that. Where were you?
At Warwick, University of Warwick. And I decided I would make Thanksgiving dinner for my dorm hall. Let us just say that I'm not a cook. And I went to Tesco or wherever I went, and I bought all the foods, and I didn't know what I was doing. And it ended up being me and one of the people who worked in the building helping me figure out what to do with a turkey. I was like, well, there's 2 holes. Like, what's the good hole? What's the bad hole? It wasn't good. But I did it. I ended up making Thanksgiving. I don't know what kind of a job I did explaining why it was important, but it was the same sort of thing. It was like, we know this is important. I was like, it's important, and I will do this for you, and we will celebrate as an us. That actually is what it ended up being. We will be us. Yeah.
Yes, and we had the other Americans in our circle over for a Thanksgiving dinner, and it was, as I recall, I think it was the day that Margaret Thatcher stepped down. I could be making that up. It was about the time she did it. So we ended up having the TV on, which is absolutely not my usual style, but I still remember it's sort of the whole thing going on. So let's do really quickly where we get a Thanksgiving, because that's an important part of the ritual, and then partly where we get the foods that belong to it, which is interesting too.
Right. So, I mean, in a sense, you could say that can you hear the bird head?
I was going to say, Rosie is convinced that when the word food comes up, she needs to be part of the party,
or else
maybe she's pissed off that we're about to talk about eating birds.
Birds, that's just what I was going to say. I'm so sorry, Bird. I'm really sorry. Yeah, no, she's really got it going. Anyway, so initially, days of Thanksgiving had a long tradition, right? And they were literally what they sound like. Let us give thanks for fill in the blank.
And they were religious holidays.
Right. And they were giving thanks to God, right? So that there was that component to it. When in 1789, so the government just starts, apparently both houses of Congress asked newly installed President George Washington to declare a day of thanks. And the day of thanks explicitly, and I guess I hadn't focused on it until this morning, Heather, when you and I were talking, he's giving thanks for the opportunity to create a good form of government. He's giving thanks for the fact that we have arrived at a place where we've created a good form of government that will protect our security and protect our liberty. And he's giving thanks for both actually civic and religious freedom, right? It actually, although it has a religious dimension to it, it's giving thanks for our government and the fact that it is beginning and we have had the opportunity to create it and launch it. Sort of wrapped up in that is also that we fought a revolution, we won a revolution. So it's giving thanks for a historical moment, in essence, which is not the way that we don't, when we think about Thanksgiving, I think Americans generally think about somehow or other pilgrims. But what we're talking about today and what Washington was talking about is something very, very different.
Well, interestingly enough, the Wampanoags and the Pilgrims did, in fact, share a meal in the fall of 2021. No, a little bit earlier. 1621. But that's not, that really gets forgotten. It does exist in an account of the time, but of course, the relationship between the Pilgrims and the Wampanoags falls apart within, months of that happening. So people didn't pay that much attention to that event until it gets rediscovered in the 1840s. And one of the reasons people focus on it in the 1840s is Sarah Josepha Hale, who is a newspaper editor or magazine editor, believes that by focusing on those sorts of rituals, she can help to paper over the growing divide between the North and the South. And she really thinks that that's going to work. In fact, it doesn't. I mean, that's going to happen later on, but
surprise.
Yeah, right. She really lobbies a bunch of people to do that. But the reason that we started actually having an established Thanksgiving is Abraham Lincoln, because in 1862, a number of state governors were really worried because the North was losing enthusiasm for the fight because they kept losing it. Essentially, they kept losing until the end of 1862. I always tell my students that if they're in jeopardy and it's the $1 million question, if the battle is before 1863, probably the South wins, and if it's after 1863, probably the North wins. And so in 62, a number of, I think it's 17 governors, maybe I'm wrong about that, get together and they don't get together. They have in their states days of Thanksgiving to say, we promise this is going to be worth it. And in 63, after Gettysburg and Vicksburg, which are major Northern victories, Lincoln has a day of Thanksgiving. And then in 64, that's really when he establishes it in November and says, we as a nation need to give thanks not just for these victories, but also because the country has become so much stronger. He calls out immigration. He says we've got immigrants, which is a great thing, coming into our nation, and we've got freedom for Black Americans. This is also huge, and we have managed to grow and change and keep an increasingly prosperous country together in the midst of this terrible civil war. And that's what gives us that real anchor for Thanksgiving, which again speaks exactly to what Washington is doing with this idea of giving thanks that we are a nation.
Well, right. So that's what I was going to say, is that the connecting thread between everything that we just said, Washington, the sort of mid 1840 moment, and Lincoln, is that in one way or another, they are all giving thanks for a national us. They are giving thanks for a government that thinks about us. They are giving thanks for security and liberties created by that government. They're giving thanks for the fact that we are coming together as a nation and are able to give thanks. So, again, I think we maybe in the process of making Thanksgiving a kind of civic religious holiday, we sort of stripped away the national, and we could even say political, not partisan, but political components of it. Thanksgiving is a national exercise. It's a national thing, and it's about us as a nation. And of course, it's a double layer holiday about us as a nation, because of course, what makes up the nation but families, us, the people, right? So it's a holiday that is asking us as a people together, coming together with our loved ones of one kind or another, family and friends, to come together and recognize the fact that we are all part of this bigger us.
Well, and that I think speaks directly to the food, because of course it doesn't take off as a national holiday that we know of now with the food and the huge meal and all that until the late 19th century, when once again the country looks like it is bitterly divided, and we get the rise of this idea of going back to the Pilgrims. They rediscover this idea of this feast back in 1621, and the idea is to recreate that pilgrim-like experience, which always amuses me, because if you read the account of the actual meal, what are they eating? They're eating deer, they're eating seafood, they're eating all the things that would have been prevalent on Cape Cod in 1621. And yes, they would have had turkeys, but given the option between eating deer meat and a turkey, no one's going to take a turkey.
They're not going to go for the turkey. Plus,
wild turkeys are nasty.
They are. What is Benjamin Franklin?
Unless they come in a bottle, I guess. I'm not a whiskey drinker. But, yeah.
No, we're not talking about that either. What was I just about to say about? What you said about going back to the Pilgrims and the meal and what they were really eating. I'll interject here the fact that going back to that moment, although that's a nice moment where there's a meal being shared, it's also not as though Pilgrim times were happy times for anyone, Native Americans or the initial Pilgrims at all, right? So if you're thinking about a MAGA-like sentimentality about going back to that original Thanksgiving, no. The spirit of that moment is nice. Everything surrounding it is a problem for many, many people.
It is, it's really funny. I've been digging a little bit into Canadian history, and boy, you forget, at least I do as a 19th century scholar, just how much starving went on in those early years, and even in the 19th century. The starving times, at least around here, we still have land named after starving times where people didn't make it. And
that's another reason why Thanksgiving and harvest holidays exist. Right. There was a time of food. Yeah. So not even just a moment to celebrate something specific with food. It was a time where you were harvesting and you actually had, ideally, if the harvest went well, food for people. And that was a happy time.
Yeah. So this also, of course, entirely layers over harvest festivals. Exactly. One of the reasons I love it. And honestly, I always love this season because it's the beginning of the year for us, right? September is the beginning of the school year. That my calendar has always gone September to August. Always. This first year that hasn't.
I thought what you were saying was no, because after Thanksgiving, there's 1 week left of school. That's where I was going.
Yeah, well, there is that too.
Yeah.
But I kind of love the whole food thing because there's the turkey, right? Which my children now cook. And And, I do love to cook, and my children now do it, and they spatchcock it. And do all these which means they cut it up and they inject it with things, and it's way quicker and it's way better than the big thing lying on a platter. But you have on the table things that remind you of your parents, even your grandparents.
Right.
And one of the things that I really love about how Thanksgiving has changed is over the years, as different people have been around that table, we have adopted their family traditions. So one of my kids' roommates came from college one year, and I always say to people, what will make it home for you to have on the table? Like, what do I need to have on the table for you to feel like this is your Thanksgiving? And one of the students one year, my kids' roommates one year, said mac and cheese. And that mac and cheese, it is, man. My kids will not permit there not to be mac and cheese on the table.
But that strikes me. It's something I didn't have growing up, but that I see that mentioned a lot. So it has now in my head come to be a Thanksgiving food, which makes me happy because I love mac and cheese. But so it got injected in the sense into your table. I approve of mac and cheese as being part of Thanksgiving. But you're right. Like, I bet if we asked random people who are going to be watching this things that they had at their Thanksgiving table, we would get all kinds of things that had never occurred to us. We'd get the things you expect, right? The turkey, the stuffing, probably cranberry sauce, maybe mashed potatoes and some kind of vegetable so you can feel virtuous while you're having all the carbs. And, maybe sweet potato pie or pumpkin pie. Some of these things are the things I love. You got a happy expression on your face when I said. Well,
just what you just said, sweet potato pie or sweet potatoes with the marshmallows on them.
Yes.
Totally Southern. That is totally Southern. There were no marshmallows in Plymouth, right?
Well, that would be true. Yeah. You're right. So that our Thanksgiving tables, in ways that we don't even know, represent the nation. And that's an example right there. Sitting in Massachusetts having Thanksgiving, if you've gotten, sweet potatoes with the marshmallows or sweet potato pie, you've got the South incorporated right into your dinner table.
Yeah. So the thing that I think is interesting about this, and even the fact we're talking about it, is that it seems to me, and I'm sort of just spitballing here, that those civic rituals, and more than just Thanksgiving, the Pledge of Allegiance, which, by the way, rises the same time we get that late 19th century rise of the Thanksgiving table. The things where we celebrate the nation really seem to me to have fallen into disrepair after the Vietnam War and after Watergate, and after the American participation in the overthrow of the Chilean government in 1973. And some of the other things that the United States was doing primarily in Latin America, but also elsewhere. There was this sense that if you celebrated American democracy, that you were somehow on the far right, that you were attacking civil liberties, you were attacking other nations and so on. And while those things are true, those things happened, and it's really important that we have those under our belts always, losing that civic identity strikes me as being one of the reasons we are where we are, that people have forgotten how important democracy is. And that the one of the things that I feel like I am seeing more is a return to that civic identity. People who care about the nation waving flags, people talking about the Pledge of Allegiance, the things, the Super Bowl last year, the displays at the Super Bowl, of Kendrick Lamar, right? I don't know. What do you think?
Well, so I think that's really important, because I think, as you said, everything that you said about all of the reasons why the nation is problematic, all of those things are true. And all of those things are with us and should be with us and are part of our history, whether people want them to be or not. But all of that said, it doesn't mean that we surrender our sense of civic identity. It doesn't mean we surrender the fact that it's our flag. It doesn't mean that we surrender the fact, actually, that we love our country. Even for all that it's done, we believe it can be better. That's why you and I are here week after week, right? We want to be better than this moment. We can be better than this moment. So I think you're right that there has been a tendency to kind of feel a discomfort with owning those sorts of things, waving a flag because it suggests blind, thoughtless, heedless patriotism, or saying I love my country because it suggests you're erasing or ignoring all of the things that the nation and its various parts have done that are ugly and bad. But I don't think you can properly love your country without owning all of those things, right? Our country is an entirety. Our country is something that has done good and bad. And in a sense, if there's a moment, if there's a time when we should be able to come together and give thanks for where we are and what we have and acknowledge everything that we've overcome to get to this point and the things that we still need to come together for going forward, Thanksgiving should be that kind of a time. So in a sense, Thanksgiving is, yes, a time to give thanks for what we have. It's also a time to give thanks for what we've overcome and to give thanks for the fact that we are a we that can do that, be that moving forward to get past the things that we need to get past. It's a super we kind of a moment.
Well, and that to me goes back not to Lincoln, weirdly for me, who really is saying we have triumphed. And, he's especially pointing to emancipation when he says that in 64. But back to Washington, saying we give thanks for, what did you say, the ability to create a new government?
That we have been enabled to create a new government that will protect our security and the, religious and civic liberty of Americans. He's giving thanks for the fact that there is a country with a government that they have put into place that is meant to give security and liberties to people as I actually did not go back and read it to see if the word Constitution is in there or not, but what he's celebrating is 1789, so that's when the government under the Constitution first goes into effect. That is what he's celebrating, is the creation of the government under the Constitution.
Well, so it feels to me in this moment, 2025, that people are doing the same thing again. When I look at how many references I now see and hear to the Constitution, to the principles of democracy, if you think about it, 10 years ago, man, we did not see that. I really remember, for me, what was the turning point was, I wrote about it when I ended up on the professor watch list about, caring about America, which would have been 2016, right after when Charlie Kirk started it, right after Trump was elected. But the time I really saw it going public and sort of going viral was when Alexander Vindman was testifying before the Congress in Trump's first impeachment trial. And he said, here, right matters. And he gave that whole paean to being an American and how this was different than living in dictatorship, which ironically, because he gets fired for it by the Trump administration, but that, then you heard Adam Smith doing it. And then and now, you hear people, especially our electeds, hitting that touchstone of these are the principles of our democracy ever since. And so when you and I are recording this, it's actually Tuesday, November 5th. On Monday, Senator Mark Kelly of Arizona was attacked by the administration yesterday. And his response was, hey, dudes, I'm standing on the Constitution. I'm doing my job. And it just was so natural to hear him say that. I thought, maybe we're in a period when we are going to resume those rituals and really do what Washington said, really work to rebuild a government that does exactly what he says, that protects the liberties and the rights of all of us, not just the people he was referring to.
Right. I mean, so when I'm asked to speak at whatever public venue I'm speaking in, and I'm asked or pleaded with to come up with something positive to say, they don't have to plead, because in a sense, that's precisely where I go. I go to a place where I say, okay, acknowledging the dire nature of where we are, alongside that is the fact that we are thinking about democracy in a way that certainly in my lifetime we haven't. We are thinking about the need to be engaged in politics and to defend democracy in a way that I probably haven't experienced in my life. We are thinking about the fact that we are a we and that we can come together and do things together for the nation, again, in a way that certainly in my adult lifetime, I haven't experienced. So for all of the ways in which this is a bad moment, there are aspects of this moment that are teaching us things and driving things home for us and making us feel things and understand things in ways that are important and that can get us to a better place. So, the way we get to that is not ideal, but given that what we've gone through is bringing this out in us, that's hugely important, and I give thanks for that.
That's perfect. And I love that. I'm going to actually end here going back to the Pilgrims, because, of course, one of the reasons the Pilgrims, as opposed to the Puritans, came to the United States was because when they first went to when they first left England and went to the Netherlands, what they discovered is that their kids sort of fell away from the faith because they didn't have enough pressure on them to continue to worship God in this very profound way. They were becoming mariners, for example, because it was a really big trading port where they were. And so what do? They pull up stakes and they try and find the most difficult situation they can possibly go to force their kids to follow God. So where are they going to go? They're going to go to the what they call at the time the New World. They're going to go to Virginia is where they were aiming, because life will suck so badly there that their kids will turn back to God. And so if you think about this moment, in many ways, the pressure that democracy is under now is making us reappreciate it and re-stand up for it. And in a funny way, it seems almost like we've come full circle. Now we have to figure out just how bad we can make it in order for people,
or we can go to a better place.
Their religion.
Before we sign off, I need to have one final word, because I picked this mug entirely randomly, but it's kind of a mug in your honor, Heather.
Oh, wow.
Burr shot first. Hamilton shot first. I don't know what you heard, but whatever it is, Jefferson started it.
Oh, that is absolutely perfect. That is great.
I didn't think of it before pulling it down to drink out of, but it is in your honor, Heather.
There you go. There you go. Well, thank you for this. And I hope you have a great holiday.
Likewise.
And I will see you on the flip side. It is always a pleasure.
Always.
And I one of the things I give thanks for, Joanne, is you.
Oh, and I always give thanks for you too, Heather. That is really nice for us to say just before Thanksgiving.
Yes, well, and a little bit after for people watching, but always a pleasure. Love you, Joanne.
Love you, Heather.
Talk to you soon.